Hi, welcome to the Educational Discipline Process and Policy Overview Training video. My name is Neil Anderson and I serve as the Director of Residence Life here at CCU. Today's video is going to cover all things discipline and CCU policy so that UVRA can be better informed and prepared for the year ahead. Let me share my screen here and we'll jump right into the content. So part of the purpose of this video is to make sure that UVRA understand the why. We believe that understanding the why is a really huge part, being able to implement a policy. And so we're going to walk you through the philosophy, the approach, the process, and some of the key policies to make sure you feel comfortable doing that. The learning outcome is exactly that, the why, the how, and the key policies, because we want you to be as prepared as possible. The three things we're going to be covering, and maybe this is a good time to take out a sheet of paper, take some notes so you can track and follow along, but there's three parts to this presentation. One, the philosophy of the educational discipline process, kind of the foundation that supports everything we do. The process of how it actually works, understanding the nuts and bolts of what a student would experience if they were actually going through that conduct process. And then three, the important policies to know. So let's jump into the first part, the philosophy of an educational discipline process. You'll notice I use the word educational because part of what we believe here at CCU is that the discipline process is part of the development of each student. First, we need to reframe the concept of discipline. If you're like me, that word might even have a negative connotation. But when we talk about discipline, we're talking about what Hebrews talks about here in Hebrews 12:11, that all discipline, yes, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, but it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. We believe that a biblical view of discipline is about the growth and development of a person. God has instituted discipline to help us in our maturation process, in our growth process, and to have a school where we're teaching students all kinds of things in the head and in their mind, but not provide something that also is beyond that in their whole development in terms of discipline would be lacking. So when we talk about discipline, first, it's coming from this perspective, a biblical worldview. Second, it's coming from student development theory. So in 1 minute, I give you a whole overview of years of research in very simple terms. The student development theory are the theories that inform everything we do in student life. That's everything outside of the classroom. These theories reflect research and understanding about how humans develop and grow. They are focused on all aspects of a student life, not just the cognitive learning, but the whole person. Often these theories, many of them, multiple ones of them, focus on both the challenge and support process of growth. It can't be one or the other, both are important. These theories talk about programs that are designed ultimately to stimulate self-understanding, strengthen skills, increase knowledge, and the primary goal of all things student development is the development of the whole person. So when you take a biblical worldview and you take what student development theory has taught us and you put those two things together, it's very common for many institutions, whether secular or Christian, to have a conduct, a discipline process in order to help students grow. Now, what we believe here at CCU, and this is a small text, so I'll try to highlight it for you. This is right from our RD manual, that we have a high view of students. This is what we believe here and why we have a discipline process. And what that means is that we should treat students as responsible adults. This means that we believe that they're ready to make independent choices, be held independently responsible, just like in life outside of college, be held responsible for those choices. And in this spirit, the discipline system at CCU is objectively based. So what we've tried to do is create a system that is not based on whether we like you or dislike you, whether you're a problem or a success, but when certain behaviors occur, here's already set up the consequences we believe will help that student hopefully correct that behavior. And so at the bottom of this, when an incident occurs, sanctions are handed out according to the violation rather than the individual. This is a small nuance, but it's something I think students often overlook, is it can feel to a person in the conduct process that the discipline is personal. It's my RD, it's my RA, they're out to get me. But what I wish every student could just have downloaded the first day they come in is a realization that we have a biblical worldview of discipline, that all of the conduct process is meant to educate and develop, and that it's really based on the fact that we have a high view of the person, that we have these objective standards that we try to hold to. If you look at other theories, and for those of you who might want to go into student development in the future, you can research all of the parts of student development theory across multiple decades that actually focus on the important role of discipline in the development of a student. Now, that's great, but I think a lot of students, and you as the RA, you may even be wondering, how does this actually work? How does the process actually work? And I'd say two things about that before I get into the content. One, it's really a lot about the demeanor of the RD, the RA, the director, the dean of students, and administering it. So while there's a process, I believe a lot of the tone and approach and posture can shape the process to be negative or positive. Now, we can't always make that. A student may experience it negatively regardless, but I think that's important. The other thing is we try to follow a process. We try to be very, very consistent. So here's the process. If you've never been through it, and maybe some of you have, you can still be an RA, but here's the process, and it goes down to the column, and you can kind of follow the tracking here. First, it starts with an incident report. All discipline starts with some incident, right? Something happened. Johnny threw a ball through a window. Incident, usually an RA is the one who types up that incident report. We'll have training on that later and how to do that well. It documents the perceived infraction, something that violated our values as a community. So what happens next is that student is notified, and RD takes that incident report. Depending on the content of that, we create a case. That case generates a letter to the student. The wording in this letter is really important to me because it does not suppose that we already know the outcome. There's always some line that says something like, we are investigating the possibility that these allegations are true. And what we want is to notify you of that, exactly what the violation is, and to give you a chance to respond to that. The student then is requested to have a meeting. Often this is with the RD. And so if it happens in your building, as you get to know your RD, you'll have a category of who that person will actually be, meeting with that resident from your floor. The RD requests the meeting and then schedules that. We'd like that to happen within 24 to 48 hours. Our goal is to get that happening fast, not just to avoid anxiety for the student, but to make sure that we're moving through these processes in a timely manner. Based on the content of that meeting, and I won't go into all the details of what that looks like, but the goal is to give the student simply a chance to respond to both the incident that's been reported and any evidence that's been presented. Based on that student's response, the RD, and then sometimes myself, depending on the nature of that incident, will make a decision. Once a decision is made, let's say we find a student accountable, that's the actual word we use, accountable for an infraction, then the student has a chance to agree or disagree with that outcome. If they agree, then we close the case, we assign the sanction. You'll know them as steps 1 through 6, and we go from there. If the student disagrees, believes that they do not agree with the outcome, they always have a chance to appeal to a judicial board. And I'm not going to go into the details of that. It's a little complicated. It's in the handbook, but essentially it's a third-party system that CCU has set up that every student has a right to appeal to the judicial board based on a number of things. And so they have to make that appeal within a certain amount of time, but that's also an option. If they feel the RD is out to get them or something unfair has taken place in the process, that system in there is a check and balance for fairness. Let's say they agree, which is often the case. Whether they like it or not, they can admit, yes, this follows with what the policies are. A sanction is handed out. And sorry, I mixed those up. Decision, sanction, agree or disagree. Then if they disagree, there's the opportunity for the formal hearing. Let's go down to the next one, document. After this, whatever the outcome is, all of the final results get documented and sent back to the student with any of the requirements that are needed. If they have to do mentoring, if they have to move out of the residence hall, if it was an egregious violation, anything else that we might require, required counseling session and intake, That will all be documented, and depending on the nature, the severity of those, sometimes we require a letter to go to the parents. In all cases, we always give a student and encourage them to be the first one to tell their parents. But sometimes that's not the case. And then at the very end, a process a lot of people don't know about, we started last year, is at the end of every semester, we send an evaluation form to every student that was found accountable in our discipline process. And we're there to learn. We want to make this process as good as possible for the student. We ask them feedback. How was it? Did you feel treated fairly? What can we do better? Because our heart is not to just execute a process. Our heart is that a student would leave that process and feel extremely valued, corrected, held accountable, and change their behavior for the good, and maybe even find that to be a really impactful experience at CCU. That's the process in a nutshell. You can read through it in detail, but incident report, notified, meeting requests, preliminary meeting, decision and sanction, agree or disagree, formal hearing if you disagree, final that bring it to conclusion, documentation of the process, and then a final evaluation at the end of every semester. You can expect this will happen like clockwork with anyone that goes into the process. If we define that there's not enough evidence, part of the decision could be we don't think this person should be held accountable. That happens a lot too. So just because you're in the process doesn't mean you're found accountable. Now let's wrap up with this, important policies to know. And here's what I'd like to say. Serving students well is helping make clear the key policies and values of CCU. So you as an RA, as you step into this year, something you can do is to actually go out of your way to help people know the things that might trip them up, the things they might not be aware of. Not in a weird way, but in a serving way. Hey, by the way, here's some things that I want you to know as a four. Here's a text reminder, an email reminder. There's three things though that I think are the most frequent violations we see. Sometimes it's very intentional. Sometimes it's passive. I don't care. I'll do it anyway. Sometimes it's unintentional. Truly, however, I'm not sure how this happens, but students unaware of some of these policies. Number one, that's the visitation policy. And by the way, I'm not going to actually give you what these are in this presentation because your homework at the end of this is to go to the student handbook and to find out exactly what the policies are for visitation, alcohol, and quiet hours. Part of that is going to help you know where it is in the handbook and to read it thoroughly so that you have a good understanding of that. But visitation, that trips people up. They're not aware of the hours, the times. By the way, the visitation policy is in place to serve the student good sleep, boundaries of people coming in and out of your apartment, and to provide an atmosphere where people can actually study. The alcohol policy is pretty straightforward. Most students who have any idea of what CCU is about realize they cannot have alcohol on campus at any time, paraphernalia or actual alcohol, that you can't drink if you're under the age of 21, and that if you are over the age of 21, you can drink responsibly, not to the point of intoxication, off campus, but never in the presence of a minor that would lead to them also consuming alcohol. We put a lot of pressure on our of-age students to be responsible adults in the consumption of alcohol, and there's a lot of policies about this and marijuana that you need to know. The easiest way to get kicked out of CCU, which is never our goal, by the way, is to use your responsibility and freedom to influence a person who's not of age to make a bad decision. And then finally, quiet hours. And we also have the community courtesy policy in there. These are just hours that are also meant to support the study atmosphere, the sleep atmosphere of campus. And I think sometimes people think if my roommates are good with it, it doesn't matter. But it's really not only a Lakewood policy, but policy we have in place to keep our buildings help students really function well. So your homework from this presentation, please review the visitation, alcohol, and quiet hours policy before you do anything else, and be prepared to possibly even talk about that in the discussion. So to wrap up, let me stop sharing here, the screen. Thank you for choosing to be an RA this year. Thank you for understanding, hopefully now, why we have a discipline and conduct policy process. Thank you for hopefully being able now to better understand how it works for a student so that you can help explain it as best as possible. really the heart behind it. And then thank you for looking up those policies to be better prepared to tell students things that might help them just avoid unnecessary consequences. Remember, our heart here at CCU is to develop the whole person, to walk alongside them, to train them well. And discipline is a part of that. We don't apologize for it, but we certainly do not hold that over students' heads. The last thing I always say to a student after I've had that meeting with them, even if it's a serious outcome, is I remind them, I do not see you as your consequence. I do not see you as the suspension I have to give you. This is a point to start fresh. This is a point where we get to move on. Yes, you'll be held accountable. Yes, there are consequences, but this does not define our relationship, and this does not define how CCU thinks of you. And often students, I think, are moved by that and find the fact that we even take away steps at the end of the semester as just another tangible reminder that this is not meant to hang over their heads, just to help them grow. If you have any questions, reach out to me, the Director of Residence Life, or any of your RDs, and thanks for watching. Take care.